Welcome back to the arcade. Yep, here we are again. Got my Gorf test set up here. And I got the number 3 pattern board, the last pattern board that I need to fix. I figured, hey, I got the first 2 working. Let's just go ahead and get it out the way. That way we won't have to worry about coming back to it. So I did the same thing that I've done in basically my second pattern board. I went ahead and took my logic probe, okay, and I went through every single one of the pins on the bad board, okay, and I made up my sheets, and I put each chip, and I put the logic probe reading of each pin on the sheets. Now this time I had an advantage because I already had the good board mapped out. So I just took the sheets from the last one and just went through and just wrote down the same readings for the good board. So I kind of cheated. But good board is good board, so it should be the same readings. So that kind of saved me half the time. But this is still a time-consuming process. But it seems to work for me, so I figured I'd give it a try. But this time it was a little more difficult because on the bad board, on this particular bad board, it wasn't straightforward. The reading, every reading was kind of a weird reading because I noticed right off the bat, really because I hooked sound up on the board. So the sound is hooked up and I got the volume turned all the way up. And I remember back when I first tested this board, back before I even repaired the first RAM card, when I tested it in my Gorf game, I noticed that you had it sounded like it was resetting. You could hear in the speaker like the game was just resetting over and over and over again. But I wasn't sure because there was nothing on the screen, and I'll turn it on right now. And as you can see, the screen is blank. And you really can't hear nothing right now except for a little pop, pop, pop. It's kind of low right now, but it'll get louder as we go. Can you hear that? Okay, it's going to get louder. Trust me. But it just reminded me of a game that's constantly in reset. So I was able to take my logic probe, and these chips have resets on the majority of them. I think every single one of them. Well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them are hooked up to the reset circuit. So, like, let me get one here. All right, U21, which is the sort of the main chip in here that the board test board always tells you is bad. U21 pin 1 is the reset. Okay. So here's U21 pin 1. And you see that? High, low, with a little pulse in between. So the game is resetting. So why is it resetting? Well, only thing I can figure is maybe somewhere on the schematic, and I took my readings, and like I say, it was hard to get the readings with the logic probe because of the game resetting, because it didn't have time really to get, you know, a full reading before it reset again. So that's kind of represented in the readings. So what I had to try to do, had to do a little different this time. last time I used yellow and green. Any reading that was the same as the good board, I would put as a green dot on the schematic here. And as you can see on U21 is 2. Pin 2 and pin 12 are green. That's the only 2. These over here were yellow. Now I put yellow this time because even though it's the wrong reading, it's not the same as a good board. It is showing a reading, a pulsing. It's not stuck high or low. Now, if I was getting a reading that was way far off, or was a low pulse or a high pulse, then I would sometimes put a yellow and a red dot. And then sometimes I started out just putting a red dot. Then I got thinking, I said, well, if it is still pulsing, even though it's a high pulse or a low pulse, I can't really say that that's a dead, short, or that pin is stuck. So then I started basically having to go through, and if it was low, stuck low or high, then that's what I kind of looked for. Because I figured in order for it to be resetting, something would have to be stuck. You would have to have something stuck low or stuck high that's supposed to be pulsing with a good signal. So I looked over everything, and I put everything down on the schematic again, and I came up with a few areas of interest. Okay, so then I thought, well, let me do a little probing with my logic pulsar and just see what happens. It can't hurt nothing. So that's what I did, and I started probing some of the areas that were, either low or low pulse, or a high and a high pulse. So I got down to right here, U21, and something happened on pin 2. So let me take my logic pulsar here, and I got it set for 400 PPS, so it's putting out a pretty steady pulse. So we want U24 pin 2. Here's U24 pin 2. All right, well, first let me zoom in on the monitor here so you can see what's going to happen. All right. Now, here's 24 right here. I'm going to put it on pin 2. Okay, wait a minute. Let me reset it. Sometimes it goes in black and white and not color. Let me try this again. All right, pin 2 on U24. I'll put the logic pulsar on. Let me get it on there. Okay, there it is. Now, it doesn't look like much, does it? But now look at what it's doing. See the yellow scrolling from bottom to top? What does that remind you of? And it gets narrow right there. The attract mode. Now look at that. The game is running. The graphics are jacked up, but the game is running. It's not in reset no more. And I got it up loud because I was listening for differences in the pins when I probed them. So, yeah, the game is running in attract mode, but the graphics are still jacked up pretty good. And there it starts over again. All right, I take the probe off, and Goes back to resetting. Okay. Well, what's going on here? Here's U24, and it's a little hard to read the schematics, but I got a better schematic that I look at. But pin 1 is up here, pin 2 is below, and that's pin 3. All right. Well, if we look right here, pin 2 is connected here and goes up here to U31, pin 7. If I put the logic pulsar on pin 7, it's connected to that same pin, it does the same thing. Okay? Now, I went up here to pin 5 and pin 7 of U40, which are tied together, and I also get the game, it goes out of reset, and the game runs in a track mode, just like it does down here. Okay? If we trace this connection right here from U24 pin 2 again, go back this way, it goes to pin 2 of U13. Okay. Now, this right here, this part of U24 is just one gate of U24. And I went by the logic probe readings on each one. I don't remember what they are right now, but according to the logic probe reading, and I think this is an AND gate. I don't know off the top of my head. Like I say, I can't keep this stuff straight. But I have had a piece of paper with what this is, and I had the truth table on it. And I took the readings from the logic probe, and it appears that this is working. So that tells me that even though I put the pulsar right here on this, that this is doing its job. So, you know, I don't think the problem is U24 here. So that means the problem is either U13 or maybe it's these two chips, because, well, these don't actually go anywhere else. Anywhere that affects. I used logic probe on every pin. So none of the other pins on this chip has that effect. So it just could be that the signal, it's not getting the proper signal from this chip here, because, all right, pin 6 on U13 is the bus request. And that's I would say a pretty important signal. And it's not correct. I'm not getting the correct signal there. So I'm thinking that's probably an internal short in U13 right here, and I'm thinking U13 is the problem. Now, may not be, but that's a starting point. So I think I'm going to pull U13 and test it in my tester and find out if that's the problem. If not, then because I suspect the U21 is good, I reckon I'll have to go up here to U31 and U40. And I did try piggybacking all these chips. I piggybacked U13, U24, U31, and U40, no change. Now, if it has a short in the chip, piggybacking I don't think will work. Piggybacking doesn't always work. Sometimes you get lucky and it does. The last two pattern boards, I was able to piggyback the chip and confirm that that did have an effect. I believe the first one had actually fixed the board, and the second one, it didn't actually completely fix it, but it fixed it enough to where it started working, and when I replaced the chip, that fixed the board. So right now I'm still at the guessing point, but at least we're getting a little somewhere. So I'm going to start with U13. Now, I'm going to go ahead and try to pull it off the board, but I have trouble with my Blackjack 4000 desoldering. I believe the sensor that regulates the temperature, it's gone bad. So it's heating up hotter than it should, and the temperature indicator is not working right. So I've ordered a new, actually I've ordered a whole new gun for it. A whole new gun was $55. And I did order a new heating element for it, which has the built-in sensor. So hopefully I can repair this by putting the new heating element in. But in the meantime, I figured, hey, only $55. It was, I think, $15 for the heating element. So I ordered both of them. And quick fix, if I put this on and it doesn't work, then I'll know it's something in the unit that's gone bad. And I'll have to pull that apart and see if it's worth fixing. If not, I'll just have to spring for a new one, because if you don't have a good desoldering station or something to desolder with, man, I don't want to go back to trying to use the old-fashioned way of solder wick and solder pullets and all that kind of stuff. So let me see if I can fire this thing up, and if not, worst case, I'll just have to wait until my parts come in. All right, well, it's been a couple days since the last segment, and I did change U13 right here. Took it out, tested it in my IC tester. It tested good. So I went ahead and put a socket in and put a new chip in anyway. No change. The board still is acting like it's in reset and doing nothing. But if I, same as before, if I put my logic pulsar on, let's see, pin 2, then it comes out of reset and the game starts, but the graphics are still jacked up. So, as you can see, the game is still running. So, I've been doing a little reading up on U13, which is a 74 LS74, which is a D-type flip-flop. And I understand it a little bit better than I did before, but not particularly in this application. It has pin 2, which is when we put the logic pulsar on it, is causing the game to start working. That is the D, or the input, and it has a clock signal on pin 3. When it's in reset, of course, the clock signal is not correct and it's, resetting. Then it has a Q on pin 5 and a not Q on pin 6. And from what I understand is you got whatever signal Q is, not Q is opposite of Q. So essentially what this does, this chip is clocked by the clock signal, and when you get a signal come in on pin 2 that corresponds with the clock signal, it switches the outputs from Q to not Q, or not Q to Q, whichever. And it also has a clear on pin 6, I think it is, which is tied to 5 volts, so that stays tied to 5 volts. Then it's got a PR on pin 4. Pin 4 also can trigger the Q and not Q, I think, with another signal. Okay, now what I tried was pin 4, which is the PR. Don't know what that means. But anyway, if I lift the leg of that chip, which is pin 4, on U13 here, if I pull this chip out, bend pin 4 out so it's not making contact in the socket, and put it back in, the game will come out of reset and it'll run in the attract mode without putting a signal on it. So I was kind of thinking that maybe that had something to do with it not working. But we know now that this chip is good. I put a new chip in. This flip-flop has 2 separate flip-flops in it. This is one of the flip-flop, and U13 is up here. This is the other half of the chip, which is identical flip-flop circuitry. So I know that's good, and I know this is good. So something else is still causing the problem. Now, since pin 2, if you put a signal on it, because right now pin 2, take my logic probe, put it on pin 2 of U13, and it's high. There's no signal coming into it. It's just a high signal. That should be pulsing, but it's not. So obviously it's lacking a signal, because when I put my logic pulsar on there, it's not the correct signal, of course, but when I do put it on there, it turns something on that makes the board start to work, but it's not working correctly. So if you follow this on back, of course it goes to pin 2 on U24, and I'm pretty sure U24 is working, because I did check. I think that's an AND gate. I'm not real sure, but anyway, I got a chart that's got all the gates on it, and it's got the truth table, and I used my logic probe to probe these 3 pins, and according to the truth table, it seems like this chip is working, okay? Even though it's got the wrong signals on it, the chip itself is functioning like it should. So then you also got a connection right here that goes up to pin 7 of U31. And also we found out that if you put your logic pulsar on there, it'll start the game running in attract mode. Well, I got thinking, well, what if something is supposed to send a signal? I don't know if this is an input or an output. But anyway, I started looking at U31 here, and the clock signal, or is it this other signal? Let's see. No, it's this signal right here, M. I'm not sure what M stands for, but I do remember in the last board, right here is M on this chip, and M right here, and this chip was bad, and because it didn't have that signal right there on these 2 chips. So I don't think, well, I don't know, it might be in play, because here's U15 right here, and I was going to say right here is U15, pin 4 of U15, which is labeled R. Is that stuck high or low? U15, pin 4. All right, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's stuck low. So I'm thinking that's a problem. I'm thinking that chip is bad. because this pin is stuck low, and this right here is a junction that goes over through this buffer and over to pin 4 on U13. So it's tied into U4, pin 4 on U13, plus it's also tied in to pin 1, which is M, on U31. And if that signal is missing on U31, then it might not be sending out the signal on this pin that goes to pin 2 on U13. So that's my theory right now. I don't know. I might be barking up or on another wild goose chase or whatever you want to call it, but what have I got to lose? I'm going to pull U15, and I'm more convinced now. I'd forgot that this is another flip-flop, U15. So it's a little questionable over here because I got some yellow and red dots on that one too. So, I'm going to change U15, and I'll be back with the results. Okay, well, I've been chasing this thing around and looking at different signals. I went ahead and so far I replaced U15, which is here and here. No change. The chip that was in there was good. So then I started following signals around, and it seemed like everything was going through U22 right here. So I went ahead and pulled U22, replaced it. No change. So I'm still at a loss. So what I think I'm going to do, I made up another sheet of for the logic probe, and this time I'm going to, on U13, if I lift pin 4 out of the socket and I turn it on, the game will boot up. It's a little different than when I put the logic probe on it, but this is, I mean, the logic pulsar. But the game is still running with pin 4 of U13 lifted. So what I thought I would do is I would let the game play like it is and go with the logic probe and make all my measurements again on every chip, because when the game is running, a lot of these chips, the areas that don't have any activity, like these chips, this right here, it don't have a clock signal. But when you put the logic probe on it, or in the condition that is running in right now, with the game running in a track mode, all these chips that are missing the clock signal have got the clock signal. And I cannot figure out for the life of me what is causing the clock signal to work when the game is running like it is now. I've looked every which way I can, and unless U5 up here, which is the control logic clock section, because I've already checked U6, I've checked the U12s, the U14s, U6, all these chips around here, like these buffers right here, I've checked all them and they seem to be working fine. So I don't know, maybe it has something to do with U5, which is the 74LS161. But I just got a feeling that if I replaced it, it wouldn't be any change. But at least I would have, I would know that that's, not the problem if, if I changed it and it made no difference. That's the thing about these chips here. I've replaced them, so I know they're not the problem. So that's starting to eliminate things anyway. The thing that gets me is that this chip up here, U43, which is the LS04, it only uses pin 8 and 9. And that is an inverter. And that, on a good working board, pins 8 and 9 is supposed to be high-low pulsing on both pins. Now, even with it running like it is right now, I'm not getting any pulses. I'm getting low on one side and high on the other. So it is inverting, but it's not pulsing. There's no signal going through it. And that comes down to U15, which I've already replaced. So, and then it goes to U33 and U31. Let's see, yeah, U33, U40, and then comes down here to U15, branches off, and goes down to U23. Now U23 I haven't changed yet. That was bad on one of the other boards. Don't remember if it was the first one or the second one. I believe it was the second board. U23 was bad. So I guess that's a possibility. But I don't know. Well, I think I'm just going to go ahead and go through all the pins again with it running, and write them down and compare it to a good working board, and hopefully that's going to narrow down what's working and what's not working. So that's my plan right now. That's all I got. So the only other option will be to just start pulling these chips and replacing them. All of them that's associated with the ones I've already replaced with the missing signals until I hit the right one. And I don't like doing that, but if that's what I have to do, that's what I'll do. But first, it's going to take a while, but I'll get the logic probe out and we'll start writing down the information and seeing if we can't narrow the, separate the good from the bad. So I'll be back. All right, well, it's been a couple weeks now since I last was working on this pattern board here, and a lot has happened. I did get the parts in for my desoldering station, and it turns out the new gun that I got didn't work. But luckily I had bought a replacement heating element, so I put that in the old gun and it works just fine. I think what it is the new gun is just wired different. It's wired for another model desoldering station, but I believe the internals of the gun and everything, even the connector is the same. So I just have to sit down and figure out the wiring and rewire it. But I got the old one working, so that's not a problem. And I've had put it to use, and I have been, trying to figure out which chip is bad on this board. And I was going to take my logic probe, and with the pin on U13 lifted, the funny thing is, when you lifted pin 4 out of the socket, and turn the game on, it would stop resetting, and as you've seen in the previous footage, the game would boot up and it would run, but the graphics were all messed up. So I decided to redo my logic probe readings with the game running with that pin lifted. And I did that. And then after I did that, I decided to do some more checking, and I started messing with the other pins on this chip, lifting them up and putting it back in and trying to figure out if any of the other pins on this chip was having the same effect. And I did find out that pin number 6 right here had the same effect. And somewhere in between doing all this, it got to the point where pin 4 lifted from the socket would no longer run the game. I don't know why. Something has changed on the board. Maybe whatever is bad has gotten worse. I don't know, but it'll still run if you lift pin 6, okay? So here is U13. Here is pin 4 right up top here. That's the one that was allowing the board to boot up and stop resetting when you lifted the pin off of the IC, okay? Also, if you put your logic pulsar on pin 2, which is the input to this chip, I think this is a flip-flop, by the way, 74 LS74. You've got mail. Anyway, now the only way the board will run, you can take the chip completely out of the socket and it will run, okay? But by lifting all the other pins, I found out that pin 6, if you lift that, the game will boot up and run. All right, pin 6 is the bus request with a line over top of it, okay? I checked the board to see where else that signal went, because it goes into, I guess this is like the data bus or whatever, and it goes to nothing else on the board. It goes directly to pin number 75 on the 100-pin card slot. In other words, it's one of these pins that plugs into the backplane, which makes connection to the CPU board, okay? So, evidently, something that's connected to this chip is causing the problem. So I decided to go ahead and eliminate this section up here, which is the control logic clock. Since a lot of these chips over here are not getting a clock signal, and I was wondering why they wouldn't get the clock signal. Okay, so I went ahead and I replaced, if you look at the green circles, everything that has a green circle, that chip has been replaced, okay? So everything in the control logic clock has been changed. I changed U12 and U24. This is the other half of U13. These two have been changed. U15 has been changed. U23. This is other parts of U24. And of course U23 I changed. So with all those chips changed, nothing has changed. Everything is just like it is before. If you have all the pins of U13 in the socket, the board is acting like it's in a reset and it doesn't boot up. You take pin 6 out of the socket, isolate it, and the game will boot up and it'll run, but the graphics are all messed up. Okay, well, in the very beginning, if you watched up until this point, you'll know that when I found out about the this chip right here with the logic pulsar, if I put it on pin 2 and put it on pin 4, the game would start to boot up. Okay, and I followed all this back. Same thing with U24 here. Followed it up here to U31. Same thing. Where these red circles are, if you put the logic pulsar on those, it would do the same thing. The board would stop resetting, and it would boot up and run with the graphic all messed up. Okay. Also, this one chip right here, U43, which this is a flip-flop. It only uses this one part of the chip, pins 8 and pin 9. Okay, on this bad board, pin 8 is a low with the logic probe, and pin 9 is a high with the logic probe. Now, if you're going, since this is a flip-flop, if this is high, then this must be low. So it seems like the chip itself is working. It's just not getting a signal to this chip, because on a working board, you're supposed to have a high-low pulse on both sides, okay, on both pins 8 and 9. So, also, if you follow this down right here, it goes to U33 and U40. Well, U40 is one chip that if you put the logic pulsar on, it pulses, and that's connected to U31. So I'm thinking that this isn't getting the proper signal. It should be getting a high-low pulse somewhere on this line. And this line goes into U15, which I've changed. And if you follow it, where does it go? It goes to pin 2 of U13, which is you put the logic pulsar on it and the game boots up and runs. So I'm thinking that is something funky over here. Either U31 or U40, or maybe U33 is bad. Now, if you look at the bus request right here, if you look on the theory of operation, this is the pattern board theory of operation. And if you go down here, it says the output to port 7E persets, P-E-R-S-E-T-S, persets 1/2 of U13, sending the signal bus request low. The Z80 located on the CPU board responds by tri-stating its addresses, data, and control signals, and then asserting bus acknowledgement low. Okay? Well, this is U13. This is the one that I'm having the problems with. U13 has been changed, so we know the chip is good. So it's not getting this signal here, the bus request, and this is the output of the flip-flop. Pin 2 is the input, so it's not getting a signal from pin 2. Okay? And I can confirm, I looked up the, it says if it gets the bus request low, the Z80 will send back the bus acknowledgement low. Okay? Well, the bus acknowledgement low comes in right here on pin 15 on U14. And that signal is not present. See, U14, pin 15 is high on this bad board, and it should be a high-low pulse. So we're not getting that signal back from the CPU. So it's not getting the bus request signal. Okay, so and if we're not getting this signal, then this signal goes down here, goes up in here, and goes into the control clock. So that is the signal that has to be present for all these clocks to start working, so that all these sections on the board works. That's what I'm thinking. Now, I don't know if I'm right, but that's what I'm thinking. So I am thinking that there's something wrong, something rotten in Dodge up in here. And has to do with anything connected to pin 2 on U13. So if we follow this back, goes into U24 here. This goes up to U31, U40, U33, and U42. So it could be any one of these. All right. It also branches off here and goes right up to U31, right here. And if you go through this, I think it's an AND gate, it also goes and clocks. I think that's the clock. Clocks all 4 of these chips. And it also goes down here and clocks U15, which is another flip-flop, which turns on another Q low, which goes up here to 42 and 33. So I'm thinking that's what my problem is. So I'm going to go ahead and I made up a little list here. And I might not get the order just right, but I'm going to change U40, which is this one right here, U31, which is this one, and then U33. And then eventually, if that doesn't do anything, then I might go ahead and change out U21, because that's one of the major controlling chips, and U3, which is the other chip which controls some of this other stuff here. And anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start pulling these chips and checking them, and I'll be back if I find something. Okay, well, here's an update. I changed U40. The chip was good, so no change. Then I went to 31, pulled it out, tested good, put a new one in, no change. Okay, so now let's see. Here was U40, that was no change. There's U31, no change. So now I pulled U33. Okay, U33 is right here. So I got U33 in the tester here. Not found. Well, that's promising, because these 3 chips are the same exact chip. So the other 2, it said, were good, and the new chips I put in, I tested them, they said they were good. This one says not found, so this chip is bad. So let's cross our fingers. I'm going to put a socket in here, put a new chip in, and I'll be back with the results. Okay, well, I replaced U33 right here. So let's put the board in for the umpteenth time. And just to show you here, that's the chip I replaced, U33, which is connected to U40, which is connected to U31, which I was having problems with. So I figured my gut feeling was telling me that it was here to start with before I did any of this. So if this turns out to be correct, then I guess you can say sometimes you should go with your gut feeling. But anyway, all right. So let's go ahead and fire it up here. See what happens. Cross the fingers. Yoo-hoo! All right. Success. Ah, boy. This was a rough one, though, but like I say, I should have went with my gut feeling in the very beginning, because I was in the right ballpark area anyway to start with. And it was all because of the logic pulsar again. Now, if I had a lot of fancy equipment and knew how to use it, I could have, you know, if I had to analyze, I could have analyzed these chips and probably found out right away it was not working. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. So, okay, pattern board number 3 is fixed. Now, let's see. How many chips did I replace? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 chips. I replaced 14 chips. And only one chip was bad. Ah, boy. Well, like I say, I started out with the U24 with the logic pulsar on pin 2. Would take the board out of reset and would cause it to the game to boot up and run, even though it had serious graphic problems. But when I traced it back to U13 and then finally made the connection with the bus request signal, and looking at the theory of operation, when it gets that bus request, it goes back to the CPU board and it's supposed to send the bus acknowledge signal, and I wasn't getting that either. So I knew it had something to do with U13 and not getting a signal through to where it was supposed to, and I just backtracked back up to here. So and the clue too was also U43. If I put the logic probe on there now, I'll have a high-low pulse on both sides. So I knew I wasn't getting a signal here, which that went directly to U33 also. See, pin 9 of U43, you follow it down, it branches off, it goes to pin 7 of U33, and it also goes to pin 5 of U40. So we have replaced U33, and that was the problem. Okay, well, that was a humdinger, I should say. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this series. This probably is going to end everything for Gorf right now. I do have a couple more boards to repair, but I'm going to hold off on them for another time. I'm ready to move on to something else. So if you like this kind of thing, please subscribe to the channel. And we'll be back with some more arcade fix. So this has just been another arcade fix. Have you had your arcade fix today?